Good evening. I'm Marilyn Cargill, Vice President for Financial Aid Services at VSAC, and I would like to welcome you to tonight's presentation, VSAC Shows You How. Tonight we are talking about what is happening between the time you file your admissions and financial aid forms and when you receive your financial aid awards. What are your schools doing, and what do you need to be doing? Let's face it, the process of selecting a college and determining if you can afford to attend it is a complex process with lots of steps and decision points for you and your student. We are starting this presentation with a series of poll questions to help us understand where all of you are in this process. If you haven't already answered the questions, please do so now. Tonight, we want to talk about how to look at the cost of college, how you or your family's expected contribution is calculated, and what your next steps should be based on where you are in the process. And we want to answer your questions. One of the very best reasons to join a live webinar is to ask questions of the experts. To raise questions from the Zoom presentation, you can type questions into the Q&A section. If you are watching from the Facebook platform, just type your questions into the comments. We also plan to have time at the end of presentation for any additional questions that you might have. We will know from the poll how many of you have completed your financial aid applications but have yet to apply for scholarships, for example. The VSAC scholarship deadline is coming up in roughly 2 weeks, so you need to make that a priority if you haven't already filed your scholarship application. Last year, over 3,400 scholarship awards were made for just over $6.1 million from VSAC. So you definitely want to at least take the time to look through the booklet and see whether or not you are eligible to apply. We also want to look to see whether or not you have filed your applications. VSAC has 2 webinars available online that will help you if you haven't filed yet. The first is a step-by-step explanation of how to file your FAFSA, and the second is a similar webinar on how to apply for your Vermont State grant and VSAC administered scholarships. These are really helpful and a great resource if you're looking for help. The links for these webinars and other useful resources will be on the last slide tonight and part of the materials that we will send to all of tonight's registrants. Many of you have completed your applications and now you are waiting, and if you're anything like my family, hoping that you haven't missed anything that you were supposed to do. That is really what we want to focus on tonight. So let's get started by meeting tonight's presenter. It is my pleasure to introduce you to tonight's financial aid expert, Carrie Harlow. And if any of you watched our FAFSA presentation, she should be a familiar face. Carrie has been part of VSAC for over 20 years. She currently works for our career and education outreach programs and has been helping families navigate applying for college and financial aid. Carrie, if you're all set, I think we're ready to begin.
Wonderful. Thanks, Marilyn. So let's get started with just acknowledging that this process seems to be a series of leaps of faith. This slide gives you a little bit of an idea of the timeline, but it shows how these many processes are just overlapping, and these leaps of faith happen when students are applying for financial aid before they know where they've been admitted. They're applying for scholarships before they know how much financial aid they've received and how much they need to fill a gap. They're making a decision about committing to a college or a trade school before even knowing the results of local high school scholarships, which may be fruitful for some students. So I want to highlight a couple of specific dates on here. Marilyn just mentioned February 11th, which is the deadline for VSAC scholarships. That deadline is a postmark or online submission deadline for all materials to be sent, not just the Unified Scholarship application. So this does mean that students have some work to do over the next couple of weeks in order to be considered for these scholarships. May 1st is considered candidate reply date. And that's the date by which most students have to notify their school of choice, their college or university or trade school, that they plan to attend in the fall. And this is often done by a non-refundable deposit, putting down money in good faith to hold the student's place in the entering class. And again, that date is May 1st. Shortly after that, in June, college bills are coming due. So you can see how a lot of these processes are kind of happening, overlapping each other. And for some students and families, they're at different stages in this process. So every college eligible to administer federal student aid is required to have this thing called a net price calculator on that college's website. This calculator shows the average net price or cost of attendance minus free money that was awarded to students in a previous year who have similar stats to yours. And this, while it's not a guarantee of admission or financial aid, the net price calculator can really give families an early idea about affordability. And I know we've talked about it in other VSAC presentations, but I just want to mention it here that if you haven't had the affordability conversation yet, it's a great time to be doing it. So let's look at some advertised college prices. These are sticker prices, to use the car lexicon, if you will. It assumes a full-time student with full cost of attendance.
Carrie,
Cost, yes,
I'm so sorry to break in. We have people saying that they're having a hard time hearing. If you could speak up just a little, I think that would be helpful.
sure. Be glad to do that. Is this helping at all? I'm kind of trying to turn off my mic as well.
I think that is helping. Thank you.
Okay, great. So this advertised college cost assumes a full-time student with a full-time cost of attendance. That cost of attendance also includes not only tuition and fees, but also for some institutions living on campus, which means room and meal plan costs, as well as non-billable costs such as books, supplies, personal expenses, and transportation. That all years figure also assumes no increases in costs. In the cases above, the most expensive college, University of Vermont and the Vermont State College, are assuming a student living on campus, along with those non-billable costs we talked about before. For Community College of Vermont and the Vermont Trade School, the cost listed is for a student living at home with parents. It includes the cost of commuting, gas, car expenses from home, books and supplies, and some personal expenses like lunches while they're at school, but no traditional room and board costs. CCV, for example, uses a higher cost of attendance than just tuition and fees and a book allowance. If you just took tuition and fees and the college's book allowance, that would be closer to $9,500 a year for a dependent in-state student enrolled for 15 credits a semester and commuting from home. For the trade school, tuition fees and supplies and books is closer to $23,000 for a student living with family and commuting from home.
Carrie, from your experience, and I know you've been doing this a lot of years, how likely is it that the families will incur or students will incur expenses above just tuition and fees and books? So if you're going to CCV, if you only are planning on $9,500 to be full time there, is that reasonable or is that not going to work?
Well, I think there are things to take into consideration. For instance, if a student's attending CCV in Winooski, they may have parking fees that they have to pay. So there may be some additional costs on there, depending on the student and where they're traveling. Of course, right now, no one's traveling anywhere, and there are no parking expenses, but they may see some higher costs based on that.
Thank you.
But I think the net price is what people really want to get at, as opposed to that advertised sticker price. And so the net price, just as a review, is the cost of attendance at a school minus the gift aid that the student receives. So grants and scholarships, basically. And that equals what families need to come up with, including student loan price or student loans that they might take out. So when we look at the net price at some of these institutions, I just want to say that these ranges are reported for families that fall in different income bands, and we're using information from the College Scorecard website. If you've ever used the College Scorecard, it has a lot of really great information on it. So the lowest amount listed under net price is for families that fall under those lowest income bands. And then the highest cost is for families that follow or that will fall under the highest income bands. And the point of this is really to show that the cost is not necessarily what that sticker price is, and it can vary from family to family. The other thing I want to mention here is that many of the lowest income Vermonters can attend Community College of Vermont and the University of Vermont tuition and fee free between the federal Pell Grant, Vermont Grant, and institutional financial aid. I wanted to also mention that there are a number of trade and career schools that are eligible for federal student aid. So while we're talking tonight, I want to make sure that I'm including them. Here in Vermont, we have Advanced Welding Institute and O'Brien's Aveda Institute. And for those types of programs, a lot of the financial aid and things that we'll be talking about, timelines, may be pertinent as well. So now we're getting into the, yeah, we've applied, now what? And when students apply to colleges and are admitted, admissions offices often share with students the ability to access and view requested information on the college's portal. Sometimes there's an admissions portal that's separate from the college portal. Sometimes it's the very same thing. But we want to make certain that students sign up for and create those accounts and look for that information. I want to mention IDOC. IDOC is short for Institutional Documentation Service, and students who have to file the CSS Profile financial aid application might have to upload their and their parents' tax documents to a portal that's used by colleges that use that CSS Profile. And so I just put that IDOC in there because for many students that is required to be done as part of the process. It's important to respond to all of those requests promptly if you can. And when helping families file financial aid applications, I often get questions about how special circumstances get reflected on the FAFSA or the Vermont grant application. What if our income is really different than the 2019 income that we had to report? Or what if we have special circumstances that mean what was reported as income on our 2019 tax forms isn't really a good indication of what's available for college? And in that case, I would like to share with you a slide that maybe helps explain how differences in income and assets might impact that EFC or family contribution.
Carrie, before you do that,
Sure.
I have a question. So if a family um, fills out the financial aid forms with mom and dad's information, and the college has questions about their tax information or their asset information, do they ask the parent or do they ask the student?
So, interestingly enough, most of the communication in this process is going to the student. So, they will ask the student for the parent information. And this is where it's sometimes really helpful for families to be talking about how they're going to share information with each other, and that students really need to be checking their email as well as their snail mail for those requests.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
So I'm going to show you a slide, and it's probably going to be a little bit scary, but we can get through this together, I think. But this talks about the EFC, that expected family contribution, and the income versus assets. A lot of questions I get sometimes are about assets, sometimes it's about a family income situation. But for this chart, we're talking about a family size of 4, a married couple with one college student, and the age of the older parent is 45. So you may not be able to find your specific family situation on here, and I don't want you to try to impute something where you don't need to. But here's what I want to show you. This family, if they have $42,000 in income and they have $60,000 in assets, that makes an EFC on the FAFSA of $1,640. If you add $40,000 in assets to this family's picture, it goes up to $2,700. And you can see that that changes the family contribution by less than $1,100. But a $40,000 change in income changes that family contribution by more than $10,000. And that's why changes to parents' income can really have a major impact on the student's EFC and thus their financial aid that they could be awarded. So if there's been a decrease in family income or there was one-time income in 2019 that really is not something that shows up normally, it would make sense to contact financial aid offices to discuss how that could impact your child's financial aid for the coming year. If you need help with this, there's a great website that was actually featured in the New York Times called Swift Student. If you Google them, I tried it today, they come up first. But they're a great website with lots of help in putting appeal letters together to colleges. So let's talk a little bit about other things that you can be working on right now. So you want to research and apply for scholarships, not only VSAC scholarship, which has a deadline of February 11th, but also local scholarships. And you can check with your high school to find out how those scholarships are administered and how students apply. The other important thing is to ask college financial aid offices, how will bringing in an outside scholarship impact my financial aid? And that's something that is really helpful for students and families in order to know how much work should I be doing on this. So I was talking with a student recently who asked that question, and what she found out was that the amount of money that she and her family would have to come up with would not change if she brought in scholarships. But every dollar she brought in a scholarship would reduce her loan debt. So we had a great conversation about how wonderful it would be to be able to earn $5,500 in scholarships so that she wouldn't have loan debt her first year. So be sure to check those things out. Another great thing to do
Carrie,
during
I'm
this,
sorry, could
oh,
you say a little more about what else could happen with scholarships?
sure. Another thing that could happen with students bringing in outside scholarships, some colleges will say, well, we will let that or a certain amount of those scholarships go toward filling in the gap that your family has between their resources for college and what the college is expecting them to pay. Other times they might say, if there's a very small number, I think less than 60 nationwide, that will say, if you bring in free money, we will reduce our free money dollar for dollar. So it's important to know that, especially as you're considering colleges, like, will that impact my financial aid at none? Will it reduce my loans? Or will it go toward what we have to come up with, that gap we have in filling in for financial aid? So it could be any one of those things.
Thank you.
Great. So another thing to do during this time of waiting is possibly taking advantage of virtual campus visits if you haven't already done so. You know, there are some colleges out there that look at this thing called demonstrated interest by a student as part of the admissions process. So when they're considering students for admission, they're looking to see if that admissions application is their only contact with the student, or if the student has maybe interacted with them um, in some way with a virtual visit or had an email conversation or attended a virtual college fair event like the Vermont Applies event that we had recently. Some colleges even offer scholarships for students who have visited virtually or attended other admissions events. So it's definitely worth it if you have not done this to check that out and maybe do some virtual visits while you're waiting.
Carrie, another question's come in. Can scholarships and grants be used for both domestic and international universities?
Oh, wow, that is a great question. So, federal student aid generally does not go international with the exception of federal student loans. The Vermont grant can be used in Canada at certain schools, but not other places internationally. And VSAC scholarships can also possibly go outside of the US. So for some things, they will not travel. For other things, they can be used outside of the country. Um, it, it would be really important to ask that international school what types of American aid they will accept as well.
Okay, you have another question that's come in, and let me know if you want me to answer this one, but if you don't, that's fine too. Is there an income level at which VSAC cannot assist a student, i.e., income is too high a level for assistance?
Marilyn, I think you're the expert on this. So I'm going to defer to you.
Perfect. Thank you, Carrie. So the answer to that is yes. We look at if in order to get a Vermont state grant, you have to show financial need. So when we calculate the family's expected contribution, there are if the income if the contribution from that income is greater than the cost of the school the student is attending, that family would not qualify. They'd receive a letter from us saying that they were ineligible. Um, if the family's income is over a certain amount, we also are unable to award them financial aid. But that number is very high because for families that have multiple students in college, so if you've got a family that's got two students going to school, Carrie was just showing you that the cost for um, a private institution could be as high as I think you was it 70,000, Carrie?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Right. So two students could be looking at $140,000 in 1 year worth of school cost. So the income level that we use that we do not award over is currently at $160,000. But even families that make significantly less than that may still have contributions that exceed the cost of their institution, and they would not be eligible. Thank you, Carrie.
All right.
Oh, hold on. Um, are there any Vermont state grants specifically for graduate school?
Oh, that's a very good question. I think that the Vermont State Grant can only be used for post-baccalaureate study in two situations. Marilyn, is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, so that is for the UVM College of Medicine and for people studying in medical school, right? And then the other one is for veterinary medicine.
Perfect.
Good. Um, so let's talk a little bit about what can I use my financial aid for, because that is sometimes a question for students as well as their parents. Obviously, the billable costs, so tuition and fees, housing and a meal plan, but also costs that might not be billed, like books, supplies, and tools, travel to and from campus to home, and also personal expenses. Let me just say, though, that the figure that colleges use may or may not be something that is true to the students. So, what do I mean by that? Sometimes with travel, the institution will just plan on from home to campus, from campus to home one time. And so, people traveling from a long distance, that may not be covering the family's costs, especially if the student is thinking about coming home over Thanksgiving break. So your mileage may vary in this. Books and supplies and tools, again, it depends on, a lot of schools will use $1,000 or $1,200 as a book allowance. Some students, if they're buying brand new books, they could exceed that pretty quickly. Other students who are renting their books may not use that much. And personal expenses, same thing. Some people live pretty high when they're in college, and then there are other people who, take that poor college student right to the edge, and they try not to use a lot of money for personal expenses. So those will be the things that may vary for families.
But Carrie, when you're looking at the aid they received and when you're looking at the cost of the institution, so when you showed us those costs a few slides ago, were you taking into account some of these unbilled expenses?
Yes, Marilyn, that's a great question. Those expenses did take into consideration that was the cost of attendance. And so that is what the college was saying their total costs were. So those allowances for travel, books and supplies, and personal expenses were in those figures. So let's talk a little bit about how the aid is paid. Um, Grants, loans, and most scholarships are paid directly to the college or trade school business office, bursar's office, student accounts office. And then after the bill for that semester is fully paid, then a refund can be made to the student, which can be used for non-billable costs if there's any refund. If there's quite a bit of aid coming and the student needs money up front for books, for example, sometimes post-secondary institutions will let students have an account with the college bookstore in order to make those purchases. They know the money's coming, it hasn't come through. They'll say, you have this on account at the bookstore that you can use to get your books and supplies. Go ahead.
Carrie, can you speak to a question is what if my student is living off campus?
That's a great question. So if a student is living off campus, again, that is the same. The grants, loans, and most scholarships will get paid to the school, and then the school will issue a refund. Now, the challenge is for first year students is there's a certain amount of time that has to be spent for the student in school before that first disbursement of aid is made. So sometimes it's 30 days before, for instance, those loan funds come through. So students should be ready to start the semester with some funds on hand before that money comes through.
Great. One more question came in. Can we confirm if we have already completed the Vermont grant application? I think my student submitted this in October.
That's a wonderful question. And what's great is if the student has a My VSAC account, because I would imagine that they filed that application online. And so the student can log into their My VSAC account, click on Work with Grants, and they can see what's happening with their Vermont grant application, including if more information's been requested. Now, the student should have gotten an email if information was requested for the Vermont grant, but we know sometimes people don't check email or they're not certain what they're reading. So it's worth it to go in and look. If the student's forgotten their password, there is a forgot password link on there. Please don't just keep entering passwords until you get locked out. We do have staff available to help with that too.
And I'm sure, Carrie, if all else fails, they could just call. Is that correct?
Very true. They could also just call and get help from our folks who are answering the phones at the Vermont Grant Program.
So, Carrie, I've got another question in front of me. How does a 529 fund affect the grants?
So when a family applies for financial aid and they're filling out a FAFSA, what they will do is the 529 plan is reported as the parent's asset. And so that gets looked at as an asset in the financial aid calculation if the parents hold that 529 account. They will also report the value of all of their 529 accounts when they apply for financial aid. And that's how it impacts the family contribution. And then the student and parents, obviously, the holder of the 529 will decide how that money gets paid and when to the institution.
So, going back to your example earlier, the if someone had a $40,000 529 plan, you've already shown that that would make about an $1,100 difference in family contribution. If they were dividing that out over 4 years and wanted to use $10,000 the first year, they certainly could, but that $40,000 would have made an $1,100 difference in their family contribution. So they would have been well ahead for saved that money. Saving that money would have been truly the right thing to do, correct?
That's correct, for sure.
And then the next year when they filed, if they used the 10,000, then they would just report 30,000, right? So that will be a diminishing asset. Is that what will happen there?
Yes, that's correct. Generally, the rule of thumb for assets in the financial aid calculation is that 5 to 7% of parent assets impact the family contribution. So 5 to 7 cents on the dollar, if you will. So when they report what's left, they're obviously looking at that diminished asset, and that will be looked at in that way that year.
Okay, another 529 plan question. What if the 529 plan is held by a grandparent?
So if the 529 plan is held by a grandparent, it does not get reported on the FAFSA. It does get reported on the CSS profile if the student is applying to a college that uses that financial aid form in particular. There's a question on it about, is anyone else holding money for you and how much? So that would be reported there. Um, when that asset gets cashed out, on the FAFSA, there's a place that says money paid on the student's behalf. Now, parents paying money on the student's behalf does not get reported on that line, but someone outside of the household, so a grandparent, an uncle, a great aunt, who decides to pay the bill on the student's behalf, which is what happens with a 529 plan, that would get reported as income for that year. So it gets collected in another place.
Okay. We have another question on 529 plans. And, Carrie, if we reach your maximum knowledge on this, we certainly could get back in touch with someone. But this one says, can grandparents turn over a 529 plan to the parents so that the grandparents can be out of the equation?
And that's one I definitely do not know the answer to. So I think that we would want to, unless you know the answer, Marilyn, I think we would defer that to our folks, our 529 folks.
So at the end of this slide, Carrie, at the end of this presentation, do we have a phone number for people to call?
We do not.
Ah, so let me get a phone number for people to be able to call us, and we will put that up, or I will at least verbally tell people what that is. And this would be a great question to call on tomorrow so that we can look it up for you.
Perfect. Thank you.
Hold on, I got another question for you. If you received a scholarship from a school, can you go back and ask for more if you really want to attend that school, but you can't afford it on what they've offered you?
So that's a wonderful question. And it is a question that seems to come up every year. And, can you negotiate your financial aid award? And while it doesn't cover the purview of this presentation, I'm happy to answer. I always tell families that, the worst thing that's going to happen is you get nothing. So it's always worth it to ask, especially if this school is the student's first choice. I would definitely mention that and go back to the school and ask. Here's the thing though. If you've already deposited, if you've already made a commitment to the school, that tells the school that you've made the decision already. So sometimes if you've decided to make the deposit to show the school, oh yes, this is it, um, and then you ask for more aid and you say it might not be affordable otherwise, the school might have the impression that they already have your commitment. So I would hold off on depositing until after that negotiation takes place.
Carrie, we did an appeal session, I don't know, 3 or 4 of these events ago, and the school person that was on the webinar with us made a point of talking about, if you're appealing, it's really helpful if you share a clear reason of why you're appealing. So it might be that the income that you applied with is higher than what you're making now. It might be that you had family move back in with you, so that now you're supporting more people than you were. But whatever it is that's causing the difficulty in the financial situation, um, and a good explanation of that, they said, was important. Do you agree with that?
I do agree with that. I think part of the discussion here is how much money the colleges have in order to look at these special circumstances. And so for some colleges that do not have a lot of funds, it's entirely possible that you need to have something to appeal on. For other institutions, if they have more funds, they might be able to, look at a student and say, this is someone we really want here. We have funds, and they're looking at how many people have already deposited and what their numbers are, and they may decide to invest more. So every situation, every college is a little bit different. I certainly would not want to, you know, give the impression that every college has this unending pot of money. But definitely that is, it's another place to have that discussion about, the information that we're basing this on is not necessarily our reality.
Perfect. Carrie, another question. Are retirement accounts included in assets?
So anything in a qualified retirement plan, so 401k, 403b, SEP, simple, that alphabet soup, IRAs, right? Anything in a qualified retirement plan is not recorded on the FAFSA. However, on the CSS profile, it's entirely possible that some schools are asking about that and using that information. And
Oh,
let's talk, oh, sorry, go ahead.
sorry, I got a couple more here.
Okay.
How long, once a grant, one, how long does it take to hear about your grant eligibility once all forms are filled out?
So for the Vermont grant, we have to wait until we have a good idea from the legislature about our funding for the coming year. So our first awardings have been anywhere from, late March, early April to last year during the height of the shutdown. I think it was much later. We're hoping that that's not going to be the case this year and we'll be able to award students sooner than that. And also for VSAC scholarships, even though that wasn't part of the question, I might as well put that out there. For VSAC scholarships, we are usually letting students know right before May 1st, I think.
Yeah, so we try to get the state grant and scholarship awards out in mid-April. What about schools, Carrie?
Oh, school financial aid awards can really vary. Some will be coming out late February, early March. The more selective schools that are notifying all their students about acceptances on a specific date, and so this year it's April 1st, those colleges will be letting students know their acceptance and their financial aid award at the same exact time.
Okay, one more question. Can the student asset contribution percentage be negotiated?
Ooh, can the student asset contribution be negotiated? Well, I think for federal student aid, it is probably non-negotiable because that is in statute, and so not likely. However, if there are special circumstances going on and there was some reason why the student had to, deplete those funds, it might be worth it to get in touch with the college and ask about that.
Perfect. I just want to remind everyone that we cannot see your hands in this format. So if you could type your questions into chat, I'm sorry, into the Q&A section, that's how we'll be able to answer your question. And if you're on Facebook, you can put it into the comment section. All right. I think right now, Carrie, we're fine for you. I'm sorry that I've interrupted you so many times, but I think we're back to you.
No, I think that that's fine. This is the great opportunity for people to ask questions. And that is another great use of this in between time is finding things out and asking those questions. So it's perfect. To go back to how is the aid paid, I just wanted to mention work study because work study is an entirely different animal than grants, loans, and scholarships. So for work study, students have to find a job on campus and they have to work the hours in order to earn the funds awarded. And the student chooses how those funds will be used. So in most cases, the assumption is that students are using those for their personal expenses. They're doing laundry, they're putting gas in their car, something like that. Most students will use that work study to cover the non-billable expenses. There are a few students who will take that work study check and walk it to the bursar's office or the business office or student accounts, and they'll say, here, I want to pay down my bill. But that is not the expectation of work study. And the way that you can find out work study jobs available will be different from college to college. But at some institutions, the financial aid office will have a list of potential work study employers. And then at other colleges, you might find that information in career planning and placement, or there might be a student work office. So it's important once students have committed to their school, they're doing their online registration and orientation to find that information out in order to get a head start and find that work study job right away. And let's talk a little bit about resources. Marilyn, you mentioned a couple of our VSAC shows you how events, and we have a financial aid videos page on vsac.org. And federal student aid also has a great YouTube channel, and you can find a lot of information about federal student loans on there, about filing the FAFSA. You can also follow VSAC on social media. So if you're on Facebook tonight, you found us. We're Vermont Student Assistance Corporation. On Instagram, we are 802 VSAC, and on Twitter, we're at VSAC. We have more events coming up. Marilyn, do you want to talk about the next one?
I do. Give me 1 second here because I have another question, Carrie, before
Oh,
we go there.
great.
For Vermont USA application, this is a knowledgeable question. I love it. Do students need to ask for separate recommendations or can they use the same recommendation as they use for college applications? And we probably should start by explaining what a USA application is.
Perfect. The USA is short for the Unified Scholarship Application. So for those many VSACs in the front of the VSAC scholarship book, the VSAC assisted scholarships, you fill out one Unified Scholarship Application and you tell us at VSAC which scholarships the student would like to be considered for. With the recommendations, the student can definitely reuse a recommendation from college admissions as long as it answers the question. So for instance, if it's the community service recommendation, we would hope that that letter would talk about the student's community service and would be from a community service advisor or a community service organization. So if it meets the criteria, yes, definitely. My personal recommendation would be for the student to ask that person if they could please change the letter slightly from college admissions to scholarships. I think that would be very helpful in a competitive atmosphere to have it look like it was done for scholarships specifically.
Perfect. Carrie, another question just came in. My son received an acceptance letter from a college and it details the financial aid. Is the aid indicated typically for year one only, or does it typically apply to all 4 years of undergraduate study?
So that's a great question. And what I can tell you is sometimes with acceptance letters, a college will issue a merit scholarship. They will offer a student a scholarship. And when they offer a student a scholarship, sometimes it will say, we're offering you this per year, or we're offering you this over 4 years. And so it's important to check the wording of the letter. But sometimes it'll say something like, you've been awarded a $15,000 scholarship and it's renewable, so you can keep it. And over 4 years, it's worth $60,000. That offer of a scholarship may not be the entire offer of financial aid. There may be more coming, but it's that initial admissions merit offer that comes with the acceptance letter. So some colleges do send the full financial aid letter, but I just wanted to mention that it's possible that's more coming if all it was one scholarship that was offered.
And Carrie, can you speak to the finance, if you're getting Pell grants and VSAT grants, what is it that they need to do when they get that award letter? How often do they need to apply?
So for federal student aid, and well, for federal student aid, you need to apply every year that the student needs money for college. So you may have already applied for the upcoming year. Next October, it'll be time to apply again. For the Vermont grant, if a student has Vermont grant eligibility, um, they can actually renew automatically. There is an auto renew process for the Vermont grant. And so when the student files their second year, third year, fourth year FAFSA, that Vermont grant will automatically be refiled. Now, if there's any changes to circumstances, if the student is changing colleges, they're transferring somewhere, they still want to file a VSAC grant application, the Vermont grant application. I think that would be important to do, but it will auto renew if everything stays the same. VSAC scholarships, some of the scholarships that we have are renewable, but some are not. And so students would need to apply each year for those. And we do have scholarships in the VSAC scholarships book that are for upperclassmen or for college students. And so it's worth it to check that out each year, not just the first year.
So Carrie, it sounds like that's part of the complexity that we talked about right from the beginning, um, that there really is a lot of variability in this process. The general rule of thumb is you apply for financial aid every year, but there's exceptions.
But there's exceptions.
Right.
Exactly. And for the CSS profile, some colleges require it every year, and some colleges only require it the first year. They need the baseline, the basic information, and then they don't need it again. So students and families really need to keep track of this kind of each year, like what needs to be done next.
Okay. Hold on one second. A question just came in, but they're coming in out of order, so I need to go find it. Oh,
Okay.
will this recording be posted on the VSAC website? And if so, where? I missed that, the start of the program, and would like to hear the start. So yes, it will be posted on our Facebook page. It will also be sent out to everyone who registered to attend tonight's webinar. So you will get a copy of this presentation. All right, so I did want to talk a little bit about what's coming up next. We are planning our very next VSAC Shows You How, which will occur sometime probably in late February or early March. And the topic that we're going to cover is how to read and compare financial aid awards. So if you are applying to more than one school, how do you compare those award letters? Because you will see when you start to get them, there is not a prescribed format that they are written in. And they don't always use the same language when they're describing certain types of aid. And so really understanding how to look at those and make comparisons is really important. So that will be coming up sometime late February and early March. And I also promised that I would give folks a couple of phone numbers. So if you have questions about the 529 savings plan, you are welcome to call 1-800-637-5860. And if you have questions about just general financial aid, some of the things we've talked about tonight, you want to hear specifically for your family's situation, you can call 1-800-642-3177. And one of the options that you will be offered is to talk to our grant division. And if you select that option, they will be able to answer your specific needs analysis questions. Carrie, was there anything else that we haven't talked about tonight that you thought was important for us to cover?
Well, I think that we covered quite a bit tonight, and I appreciate everyone's questions. This is really a process where asking questions is very, very helpful. And I know sometimes I was first generation college bound in my family. And I know that sometimes people have fears of looking dumb in this process. And so they're afraid to ask questions. And what I will tell you is that many people who work in financial aid are doing this because they want to help students. And you will find a very receptive audience there, people who might be stressed, but they really do want to answer your questions and help you. And I would say that that's the same thing at VSAC. Please feel free to ask us questions and continue to ask. We are happy to try to help you. And if we don't know the answer, we sometimes have access to experts who can help us get you that answer.
That's great. I did want to tell you, Carrie, a little bit about our audience tonight. So 86% of this audience has completed their admissions applications, which is fabulous.
Yes.
Yeah, really
Yes.
good. 50% have already completed their FAFSA and their Vermont grant application. That other 50% that have not, the two links we have on this page right now, the financial aid videos page, will help you fill out both your FAFSA and your Vermont grant application. 55% have not received any awards yet. And that's not unusual. Is that correct, Carrie?
That's totally correct, Marilyn. That many people have not heard yet. I think students who are getting accepted to schools that have rolling admissions, they might be hearing more about financial aid, but for some of these colleges that are using a standard date, they probably have not heard yet.
And so what what's more reasonable? Should they be thinking they'll hear in March, April? We know we've got that May 1st candidate reply date, so hopefully it's before that.
I would say shortly after the student's been admitted, that's the time to be checking what's going on with financial aid stuff.
And again, we're going right back into the your online and you're going into your school students portal because that's where you're going to find this information.
That's correct. For many colleges, they have gone to this portal system, and those days of getting a letter in the mail are fewer now.
The other thing I wanted to mention to you, because I know this will make you happy because you feel very strongly about this, 82% of our attendees tonight are either the parent or the parent and the student. And I know you feel very strongly, students and parents, this is a collaborative effort here. They both really need to be involved in this.
That's correct. Definitely. Student involvement is so important, and parents and students working together. I think this is when, good decisions can be made when you're working together.
I agree. Well, if there aren't any other questions tonight, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us. As I said, there you can give us a call at 1-800-642-3177. You can certainly use the links that we're about to send you when we send out tonight's presentation. And we certainly invite you to join us next month or early March to start talking about how to compare financial aid award letters. Thank you. Oh, hold on. I watched the video to be able to receive federal financial aid. Is there anything else I need to do? Yes, you really need to make sure you've also applied for your Vermont state grant. But Carrie, what else would you tell someone to do that's watched their federal video?
I would also be checking out local funding options. So, for instance, looking at the VSAC scholarships book, also looking locally at the high school to see what scholarships are being posted there, and if there's a local process with the high school counseling office.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you again, everyone, for joining us. And hopefully we will see you sometime next month.